Okay. Yeah, so RSVP by Monday, July 15th. We'll be over at DNR. We're gonna have a conference room booked over there to talk about things. There is also a virtual option as well. But we would love for you to come in person because then we're gonna come over to the USCH Herbarium and get a tour around here. And continue talking about issues and the curation crisis and things that are happening with Duke and things like that and brainstorming ideas together. So please share with South Carolina Herbaria people who would be interested. All right, so our agenda today. We have covered a lot of fields so far in our meetings. So we are slowing down a little bit. But we did want to talk about these real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Avery.
Okay, so there is an option in CERNEC to search for other entered specimens that could be duplicates to the collection you're on. The fields that the search tool uses are collector/observer, the collector/observer number, and the collection date, not the verbatim date. This can also be toggled on. If the search returns any records, they have 3 possible search types. So that's possible exact duplicate, possible exact duplicates with notice, and possible matching duplicate events. Along with those, it gives you up to 5 options that can be selected for each individual record, which are transfer all fields, transfer to empty fields only, link its duplicate, go to record, and merge record. You want to really carefully examine the results, and if it's applicable to you, you want to go ahead and select the appropriate option. It's really important to double check the return results against the collection label for the specimen you're entering to be certain, because even if another record was previously entered, it could be incorrect and it might still show up in your search results, and you really don't want to carry over the incorrect data or merge records that are actually separate occurrences and not the same one.
Hey, Chilla and Avery, just one quick thing. Just the duplicate screen behind you is not showing up on my screen.
Oh, sorry. Let's see. Thank you.
Okay.
Try this again. Yeah. Okay. All right. Are you guys seeing the
Yeah, it shows up now. I can see
okay.
it now.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead. Thank you.
So this is a screenshot for the Darwin core descriptions for your result possibilities. It's a little wordy. So on the next slide, we have a table breakdown. So there's possible exact duplicate, and it means the result is going to match the collector last name, the collector number, and the collection date. This is where it's most likely to be a duplicate. Possible exact duplicates with notice means it matches the collector name and the number, and the date you entered can be found somewhere within the record, but it's not necessarily attached to the date field. If you have possible matching duplicate events, it means it matches the collector last name and the collection date, but it did not find the collector number. So for linked resources, if you go under that tab, it also includes a second method for searching for duplicates. I personally prefer this method, but for today, we are not going to cover this. We're going to do that in another meeting later.
So so the pros of manually linking the duplicates, where I don't know if you guys are familiar with the built-in duplicate option, duplicate matching options. Currently, if it says S.N. when you run that, run it under the administrator panel, it will actually go ahead and consider that a duplicate. So if it's, a collector and it's the same date and it has S and they both, but there's no collector number, it is tempted to put those together as duplicates. So there is, that's something that we're actively investigating the best way to handle. And we have had volunteers and people who work with our data to go ahead and manually connect them just to be just to be sure. Also, sometimes a duplicate will have different annotations, and it's beneficial to link the records, but one institution has not fully filled in the metadata, so it's not recognizing as a duplicate. So it doesn't matter how many times you run the duplicate tool, the duplicate matching tool, it's never going to match because that particular institution has not put in the collector number or the collection date, or it's put in a format that doesn't match. So in that case, you would have to brute force match it, and it's not even going to show up under the duplicate source. You're going to have to use the linked resource tab to match it. I use that a lot because we like to have all of the species of concern, all the duplicates linked, and I have to go through anyway through every single species, every single institution, and you can use the OCC ID to link it. But the issue with the S.N. and it also causes issues with a geolocate as well. So if you've got a collector that says that has either a blank or an S.N., it's tempted to say, oh, it's all the same on the same date.
So one of the questions we want to pause here for is, does your herbarium use the duplicate button or the search option under linked resources at all? And what do you find necessary to consider a record a duplicate?
We are not using it.
Hey.
And hey, we're not using it, but if I consider a duplicate when I go one step farther and go to the labels in other collections, and if they are the same, then I consider it a duplicate. Otherwise, I don't.
Thank you. Let's see.
My answer would be the same as Lorena's. I don't use the duplicate button, and my definition of a duplicate would be similar.
Yeah, and we will, and I've gone back and forth on that because there is a benefit. It's an extra step. If you're having a volunteer who's checking metadata, going through and clicking every single time to link as a duplicate it adds time to processing the record. But that pesky S.N. and blank collector number really needs to be addressed, and I get very nervous.
The other issue would be if someone incorrectly puts in S.N. to SN. Or just SN.
Oh,
That's
right.
another way it can get a little messy.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if we mentioned this, but the duplicate search actually is based on the last name only. And so because somehow whenever, if like, for example, John B. Nelson, when you do the duplicate search, B.E. Nelson from Minnesota shows up as an option. So I always hesitate to tell volunteers to use that duplicate option because I've seen them try to merge records or carry over and write over data and that kind of things for records that don't make sense. But I do trust that with proper training, certain volunteers could use it well. Yes, Lorena?
I was going to mention that, so now I am processing this data, this set of plans that was, I think it's the 4th set of a project and was separated before all the labels were done. So now depending on who is preparing the labels are different. So even if they are technically the same set of plants, right? The same project, the labels are coming out different and they have different type of information, even though the number will coincide and so on. So that's why I'm like very leery of like automatization of this step.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and go on to the next one.
So in the Exicati field, the way we see this, collections are usually marked for this on the collection label. And when you start to type into the field, the suggestions for an Exicati will start to appear in a drop-down box. So what you end up doing is selecting the appropriate title for that and entering the specific collection number in the number field to the right of that. And we have an example here from the algae collection for algae Terra Novae.
So one thing that we've been playing around with, some field books have extra data. about herbarium specimens that don't make it onto the label. And we want to be able to see that. And it turns out that each herbaria has a unique set of field notebooks based on who was working through that herbaria at the time. And so, for example, I use my boss as an example, Keith Bradley. I added him as his field notebook as an Exicata, and then you can add the number. The Exicata number is his collection number, and then you can link the specimen to it. And then in the notes, I added the pages in which he has comments about that particular specimen. And the idea long-term is to post on either the herbarium website, or, for example, for Keith's field notebook, it would be hosted on the SCH, the Heritage Trust portal, the PDF scan of his notebook, and then it would be linked so that somebody could go back and look at the original. The benefit is that it makes the collector's field notebooks visible. I have actually, for certain sensitive species and rare and track species, have found more data in field notebooks. And so if it's not just sitting on a shelf in a herbarium and people can actually be looking at it, they can find out more information. The issue that I'm having right now that I'm going back and forth on, like posting the PDFs publicly of all of the excerpts of the field notebooks, are the sensitive species and how to protect that. And I have not yet come up with a solution. So I'm just floating this idea out there to everybody of, what do you guys think? Is this a good idea? Is there a solution that we can find for the sensitive species? And that kind of thing. Do you guys have any comments?
I'm going to be honest, I am not there yet. So yeah, I haven't even started exploring that. I wish I could be of more help.
No, of course. I mean, and the idea is that, we develop these protocols so that when you guys do get there, there will be something written down that you guys can take a look at.
Can you go back one slide?
Mhm.
And so the issue is here that it doesn't, what is it doing? I mean, as far as the sensitive species goes.
Well, if I'm posting the PDF as a public link,
Oh, the scanned PDF.
yeah, the scanned PDF of the field notebook,
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
someone can find the sensitive species on the list and the Exicata, go to the link, go to that page number, and then read all the information about the sensitive species and its location.
Mm-hmm.
And any comments, access.
Yeah, so I guess it might depend on the Exicata
Mhm.
and how much detail's in it. I don't know. Maybe there's, in those cases you could do like redaction of the page image. I know, like, I think a lot of the specimens coming out of University of Florida do that anyway. And some of the stuff in the Florida Plant Atlas, if it's a sensitive species, they go to the extra steps of blotting out the text in that image.
Yeah, that's actually not too bad. Mhm.
So I was just curious, just as an example with Keith Bradley's journal, or maybe another journal that you viewed, what specific detail was useful from the journal entry?
So for a lot of his mass-produced labels, which he is working on adding more data on his labels, he had put access information. So if someone wanted to follow up, it wasn't just here are the coordinates. It was, he made notes for himself in his field notebook that you could only access, or basically the only way you could realistically access it was using a canoe. And so some of that, I suppose, you could figure out on your own, but there are certain things, like there's a rare plant site, I'm just off the top of my head, near Stevens Creek. And it's very difficult to access if you just walk straight to the GPS point. But Bert Pittman figured out that you could walk along the power line row instead, which was still not fun, but a lot easier than just trying to walk straight. And so those kind of access remarks might not make it onto the label.
I'm just curious with, I mean, but couldn't that information go? I was just looking at the editor screen on a specimen entry. I mean, could that possibly go under miscellaneous, under the notes field, data field for
I mean-
occurrence remarks, or would it not be appropriate to put something like that there?
I would put that in location access remarks. I would put into location remarks. Personally. And that's a really great point. I guess I'm coming at this more from, I understand that a lot of herbaria don't necessarily have time to fully process data. And so I'm thinking if they at least post the PDFs of the field notebooks, then they might not have time to go through and fully edit their records. But then if they at least linked it to the field notebook, I could browse the PDF and pull out what's necessary. So that's the angle I came from, but I hear you and I hear your point that yes, in an ideal world, first of all, the collector should put everything on the label, number one. Number two, then it should be all entered onto the digital record. But for example, right now, what we're struggling with Hannah's project as another example of things that might not be on it, like not with Keith in particular, but Mary S. Taylor had full-on maps in her field notebook and had detailed habitat descriptions. And we can't, well, first of all, apparently they're lost time. They're being searched. But when they are found, we would love that PDF. And until it's being processed, our team would go through and process all of the rare species data, but we're focused on track species. So if somebody else wanted to pick up and process and pull out the rest of the stuff from that field notebook, that PDF would be available and linked. So this is more from a crowd point of view that I'm thinking of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
All right, so the other field we want to talk about was types. Sometimes people actually add it to the original label, but most of the time people don't realize it's a type, or I guess I've seen it a lot more as an annotation than as on like the actual label like this. So we use the standardized terms as per class. And we use the formatting, do not use all caps. So even though they wrote it in all caps, we just capitalize the first letter. And then we add the type information as a determination with the verbatim details and ID remarks under the occurrence, under the tab, under latest determination. And then we write the standardized type into the type field. So I tried to put it in here on a spreadsheet, but here's the original that we use. And then he did have a couple where he had these kind of double asterisks. And so he's saying these terms are commonly used but not officially designated. So I don't know how you guys feel about actually, because I see a lot of specimens actually just straight state. They just say straight type, even though technically that's not correct. So, and here are some examples where we've seen them written, and a lot of people write it in all caps. And so that's why I was kind of tempted to say the format should be all caps, but it's up to you guys. Also, from a data standards perspective, you can do, I would specify all caps versus not all caps simply because it's easier to give volunteers and students direct and clear instructions and just instead of just telling them oh, whatever, because even though we can find it, and we can do a search that's not dependent on capitalization. It's just, I find it easier to just give clear instructions. Do y'all have any thoughts about using FLAS standards? Should the ones with the double asterisks be excluded and only the official terms be used? How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I'm confused as to like what the double asterisk was.
So he's saying,
So there's a type and then there's a, oh, okay. Officially designated. Or, so what is a clonotype? But just a plain type is not? Oh, so it has to be a holotype or something else like that. Okay. Well, so we have some that are like suspected type. I mean, there's one that very obviously probably is like a holotype, but it's not clear. So what would we do in that case? I mean, we have to put something on there that lets us know that there's basically only like 5 specimens of this collection in the world, and we have one of them, and it was the original collection that was then sent out by to these other institutions. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, I think we have to reserve some space to include type, even though ICBN standards might want us to really say holotype or isotype or something like that.
Mhm.
So may I ask, Eric, what makes it suspicious of it being a type or not?
So this is a 19th century specimen that was it was collected by Ravenel in South Carolina, and he sent material to Asa Gray. Gray also received material from Chapman in Florida, and Chapman was going to recognize it as a new species, but Gray alerted him that Ravenel had already collected it and that he needed to talk to Ravenel. And so material was exchanged between Ravenel and Chapman directly. And ultimately he named it after Ravenel. And then Ravenel recognized the importance of the species, being that it was sort of rare and new, and sent you can actually see on the sheet where he lifted a specimen off and sent it to Engelman at Missouri Botanical Garden. And all of those specimens, like at Harvard, Missouri Botanical Garden, and other places, are designated as types. But Chapman didn't really necessarily include a herbarium and designate a holotype when he did this.
Okay.
So it's very clear that because of the communication that happened beforehand, that they are type material, but we don't know which one's what. Like which one's the holotype, which one's the isotype.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, so yeah, for that reason, I think we've just put on there like probable type.
Right,
I
but in
agree.
this,
And that's actually on the specimen. And then my other opinion, and I'll just share this real quick, is that all caps really makes it stand out. We don't tend to necessarily file our paratypes, I think, with the type collection. These are things that are collected in the same sort of area, but they're not necessarily part of the type collection. Or from the exact type locality. And so if we're looking through like the regular collection and see something that's designated as a paratype, a nice big capital font, all caps font, kind of sticks out so that we know it has some added value. So I think that's been our sort of standard approach to the all caps bit. But in terms of putting it on the record, I mean, I'm a little confused too, because I think then there's like a checkbox or something, or there is a drop down. I was trying to look on a portal right now, but it's giving me trouble. Record details. Type status. Oh, it doesn't have a drop down, but I think there is a. No. I don't.
I'm pretty sure it's just type status.
Yeah, it's just type status, and it isn't standardized, which is a little bit bizarre. But in
Right.
the Symbiota help documentation gives an example of an all caps holotype, isotype, paratype. But in Darwin Core, everything's lowercase. Like every single thing is lowercase.
That's all I was
So-
saying. And I mean, sometimes when I'm thinking, or when I'm working through this and writing guidelines for students, that's what I just want to highlight. Yeah, there are certain things where it's just I just want to be clear and concise so that there's not a question.
Mhm.
Because people will come back and ask, and then, you know, whatever mood you're in at the moment when they ask you in person, and then you forget, and then you know,
Right.
it's just easier from the beginning to just say just this way or just that way.
Okay, yeah, I know what I'm thinking now. It's like if you go to the front end of one of these portals, one of these Symbiota portals, and you're doing a search for something, you can limit to type specimens,
Oh, right.
and then oops, now it's being slow on me again. But I don't. Yeah, so it's just a type status. So it bases its search for type specimens on the fact that you have something in the type status field.
Yeah.
There's not like a checkbox for it. Is that correct?
Right, exactly. So that's what I'm saying is like,
Okay.
and it's not standardized, which if it was standardized in the future, they could add, you could search specifically for these different
Right. Right.
things if they were all, or these different types of types, which is a funny way to say it.
Yeah.
But these different types of types that, if they were all entered in the standard matter, actually, I would really love long-term if they could just do a drop down for this. Because if this is based on the International Code of Nomenclature, it would make sense for them to have a drop down. Somebody has already come together and created this list and curated it, and had it, you know, peer reviewed. So I'm kind of confused why it's not a drop down to begin with. But until it is, I have been telling students and volunteers to follow only this list. If it's not on this list,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, someone wrote something that's not on here, to immediately bring that up to the curator.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that some really excited botanist out there might just come up with some very convoluted combination of iso, neo, lecto, paratype, or something like that. I mean, you could put all that in there and say it's somehow related to a type locality or something like that. But those would be kind of weird, I guess, and uncommon. So I don't know that, yeah, straying too far from the list of types that Floss has is it, yeah, would be too big of a deal. I mean, I think that works, but I would lean towards entering it as all caps for the same reason that when it shows up on a record or a list of records, it'll be more prominently displayed than
Okay.
just a what do you call it, proper case with a first capital letter.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I mean, you know, whatever.
May I ask how difficult will it be to make, if you make a search, or if it's a search that it's not defining the caps, or like, I'm sorry, I am blanking out on the proper term for it, but like if you could search both like all caps and not all caps, right? Is that easy to do? Because
Yeah.
following up on what Eric was saying, like most of the herbaria have them in caps, right?
Mhm.
But if you have students working and there is one that has no caps and they are like replicating it, and especially for other institutions that are not yet following your standards, I wonder how difficult will it be to implement searches that are not taking care of cap versus non-cap.
I mean, it's just an extra couple of characters to add wildcards.
Yeah.
But are you asking in terms of like if you're searching from the front end of one of these
Yes.
portals?
Yes.
I don't know that I've tested exactly what you're saying, but my impression of the way they have the search parameters geared for most of these fields on that front end search is that it's very loosey goosey. It doesn't really care.
Right. So that's why I was asking this question. Is it really a matter? I know that we want to have everything standardized, but like if we don't decide on that now, could we still be able to pull the information? Is it critical that we decide?
Oh yeah, no, I mean I think it'll still come up in search results, particularly because I think at least for this field in particular, because it's just a checkbox to see if there's anything entered at all.
Right.
Like it could just be a stray keystroke of some sort, and it would
Right.
still return it. It wouldn't make any sense, but it would be there. I'm just thinking of in terms of how the data are displayed for like a potential researcher that's looking into these sorts of things. It would be easier to find the types because that text would stand out a little bit more than just your standard
Yeah. Get you.
case usage or whatever. Now, in terms of like, say if within your data entry efforts that you have a student that has entered a few records as lowercase and then some as uppercase, there should be like a batch editing option where you can switch that pretty easily.
Yeah, that's actually correct. Yeah, so I mean, right, and as I'm saying, that's what I'm saying is like from a data searching, cleaning standpoint, it's not a huge deal. It's just I know that when I'm working with a lot of students in a lot of different areas and a lot of volunteers and just work, people who work with us also at DNR, the question comes up as it does because people are like, wait, what do you want? And so I just like to have like a clear-cut answer that I am consistent with myself and I write it down in the guidebook that they can check. I just didn't know if you guys wanted to all be consistent. We don't have to be. But I am going to, and I mean, if Herrick is saying that all caps is what he prefers, since we can do all caps. And then that I have that straight answer so that if somebody is working independently, they can just open the book and be like, yes, I have to follow this. And I know I ran into that too as a herbarium volunteers. I want to do everything right. And if there's no concise rule in the type status or like how to enter it, my inclination was to go find Herrick or somebody and be like, Herrick, what do I do? Do I put it all caps? Do I not put it all caps? So sometimes it's just easier to just have concise rules, but you don't have to. For our guidelines, we will.
Going back to all the types that you were citing Kent's guideline. So what I try to do is to have the volunteers and people that are working here or starting to work to transcribe everything as it is in the folio.
Okay.
So if it is not like not an accepted type of type, I still want it there.
Okay. And that's a good point of do we, and that's a good issue because to bring up, because there's potentially, and I appreciate having this discussion because I didn't even think of that of yes, what should we do if it doesn't match? And I think at the time we had discussed about if it's not on the list to just either ask the curator what's up, and then in that case, again, we want to record that information verbatim. So I think just off the fly, I would have said, write the verbatim into the notes / occurrence marks, and then consult the curator about the official term. But because there really should be a verbatim field and I guess a drop down, but I don't know how frequently are types being made up that are not on this list?
It depends on the herbarium type. Because if you have specimens that are used for developing cultivars and so on, like I know that it's a completely different domain of taxonomy, but like you might have of taxonomy and like plant science, we have several of those cultivars that have a different type of probably like in the 60s, they were other type of options where you can like refer to them as being like the first of that cultivar, and they somehow accommodate a type for that. So I would like to conserve that information because since I am not an expert on that group or field, I can only facilitate the information. I cannot make any decision.
It makes sense. And we're gonna go ahead and move on, but I really love that discussion because I think it's very important.
So the option for cultivated and captive is only a checkbox. It just indicates how the specimen became established. Darwin Core specifies that this should also apply to specimens that are not able to exist on their own. So some examples where transplants are cultivated / captive, specimen required human intervention, like they're in a flower pot, that's also cultivated. But if it were naturally seeding in the wild, it would not be cultivated or captive. What other instances do you guys think should apply for us to select cultivated or captive?
Well, I just offer that there can potentially be a lot of gray area on some of that, like especially the sort of old home sites where things are sort of persistent. Like they obviously would have been cultivated at one point in time, but it sounds like the definitions that you provided in the previous slide were hinting at even something that was planted by so-and-so's great grandma back in the 1800s that's still growing at their old homestead would be considered cultivated.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that most of our collectors today would consider that because it's just sort of persisted. It was planted at some point in time, but it's managed to survive decades on its own.
Yeah, and I have questions about this field in general, and this is something because I had always assumed that the whole purpose of this field was to focus on whether or not the specimen itself was cultivated captive. Like, is it being grown in a botanical garden, in your garden, in a garden? So a plant that is native and present in South Carolina, but it is being grown in a nursery for propagation. So it's being grown at Clemson Botanical Garden. So it's in a flower pot, but we felt that it was important for those features to be available as a herbarium specimen for viewing. That to me, I always thought that that's what cultivated meant. So it's not that the taxa itself is cultivated, because we do a lot of the taxa work that we do at SCDNR is sorting out like the status in South Carolina. Like, is it native? Is it only present because it's in cultivation in South Carolina? Is it a waif? And that kind of thing. So it kind of relates to establishment means. And I think that what we kind of sort of inadvertently uncovered is that there's kind of sort of some mixing of concepts here. I'm not entirely sure how to deal with that.
But you said the taxa, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't say the specimen. I think this should be only for the specimen, not for the taxa. So if you have like, let's say, Oconee from South Carolina Botanical Garden, then it is cultivated and it's captive because it's in South Carolina, but the natural populations in, I don't know, like Devil's Fork, right? Those are not. So I think that this should be just restricted to the specimen that you are putting in the database, not the taxon. Does it make sense?
Yeah. And that's what I thought it was until Avery had pointed out that this is what Darwin Core says. And I was very surprised. And we don't have to follow that. And that's something that I will be, at IDIC Bio in May. And I want to bring this up in person to them that, hey, why is your cultivated checkbox mixing specimen versus taxa information?
Oh, by that definition where it says this true false field, enables the ability to filter non-native or naturalized species. That's kind of
Yeah.
that needs correction. But yeah, I agree with Lorena that in terms of the Darwin core field, it should apply to the specimen, the individual collection, and not the taxon as a whole.
Great, because if I'm searching for a rare species and I don't know, Clemson Botanical Garden is growing and submitting a bunch of herbarium specimens to Clemson so that morphological, those morphological features are preserved and available for review, then I'm like, oh, well, I heard all of these random occurrences around Clemson, South Carolina, but it has nothing, it's captive. It doesn't count. Like that's not a population that I'm looking for. So I would find that very frustrating too. And also so I mean,
Imagine, like if someone had a plant from another state, they traveled with it because it was part of their garden and then kept it, then it's still that's not a yo either.
exactly. So I mean,
That would screw up your data.
right. So we need to know if but I can bring that up and I do plan to, because I just want to make sure that before I did, you guys agree with me that this should not.
Well, here's a big point to make here, that these fields occur on a specimen record data entry form. They are not found on the taxon information form. Like these edits, that this cultivated captive stuff is specimen related. If we were trying to say that this was a non-native or invasive species or naturalized species or whatever, those data should be associated with the taxon tree that's sort of the backbone pick list. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then that would only, that gets like even further complicated, because that would only be relevant if the tree were used in a very narrow geographic sense.
Mm-hmm.
And since I'm going down a rabbit hole of problems with it, but I think the point to drive home here is that the field occurs on a specimen data entry form and not a species data entry form.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
exactly. So this needs to be specimen specific,
Right.
not taxa specific, because there will be other databases. Multiple states are working on specific state specific taxa databases. You should not be trying to work that out on specimen records. So just in case, I'm gonna go ahead and quickly remove on. Go ahead.
So in life stage, we're just talking about the stage or age the specimen was found in. We at USCH leave it blank unless this is specified by the collector.
So yeah, and here's
Like
like
sapling is used here in the first example. The second one, he says it right away, mature. So how common is it at your guys' herbarium to see the life stage or age included on the label? And if it's not specified on the label, would you have someone else at the herbarium try to determine that and enter it anyway, or would you leave it blank?
I am instructing to fill as much as they can, right? So, because this is the rule of thumb for people who write labels is not to put what is obvious, right?
Mhm.
So you're not going to put that the leaves are opposite because you can see that from the specimen. So you can also infer that a specimen is an adult specimen when it's reproductive, for example, right? If it's not clear, I will ask to leave it blank, but if there is something that can be added for value of the specimen in the database, I will add it. And the same goes for flowering, I think. Flowering and sterile and so on.
Any other comments or questions?
It's not common in my herbarium only because I haven't just taken the time to, include the label from the drop down list, but it could be done. So
I think what we
Use-
were trying to avoid was, say we have a volunteer student worker, we don't want to tell them, look at it and make that determination if they don't have that background of a botanist.
Yeah.
And then we have incorrect data in the system. It was to err more on the side of caution.
I agree with that.
And I do like the idea of people using it. I know Mihai will deliberately go back and collect plants or specimens from different life stages because it can differ. And so he's like, well, some plants you can really only tell when they're like fully, fully grown and fully developed. And so then it's kind of annoying that like you can't really identify it until then. So he makes an effort for specific species to go back and grab like young, but he marks that on the label. So I mean, I think that's nice because then you can search for it later if you fill it in life stage. But I definitely agree that it has to be filled in by the collector, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So sex is used for dioecious plants. Sometimes people put the symbol, and then sometimes people write it out. So in this example, they essentially they just put the symbol, but and then this person they just wrote it out. So the question is, oh yes. Sometimes I just want to clarify for student volunteers that just because or students or just anybody, if there's a mention of both and it's not explicit which one the specimen is, then leave the sex field blank. I don't think there should be a male and female. That's too confusing in my opinion. My understanding is this is supposed to be for dioecious plants only, so it's male or female, not both. Any other mention of sex goes into the description. And then the question is, from like a data cleaning standpoint, should we include, if someone bothered to write the key code, there's a temptation to follow right verbatim, but I don't know if it's great data standards to include specialty symbols in the form.
How will you search it?
Yeah,
You'd have to
it's
enter
like,
as well, but it might not have that search function.
Yeah.
and there might even be actually code to like strip odd characters and that sort of stuff from it for fear of code injection or whatever. But yeah, M or F, but then, or it might be better to write it out completely. And I agree with your position on reserving it. To some degree, I agree with your position for reserving it for dioecious species only. But I mean, it may be that you just have like the top half of a corn plant or something, and you've got just the male flowers, and that's you're dealing with Manishi there, and I don't know if it's worth going through all the sort of already known sort of characters of Senecio species or something like that. You know what I mean? I don't know if I have a real good opinion on, on the whole thing.
And when, I don't know how is it for you teaching, but students now get very upset if you say a male and a female. You have to say carpellate or staminate. So that's probably another thing that we should be thinking.
Mhm.
Because the correct term is really carpellate or staminate.
Right. Yeah.
That's an excellent point that I did not think of. I do really appreciate that. 'Cause maybe we should say follow this or that, and have it standard. And by the way, go ahead.
Oh, I just have to step away a second. I got a student volunteer. I'll be back.
No, of course. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I'll make a note of that in the form too when I send out the the form for feedback, that should we change it to that? And I don't know if you guys have had any volunteers or have had the capability to use it. Hannah has been using it, Ever has been using it, and Taylor has been using it, have been using it. If we do use those terms of like, which I'll make sure it's spelled correctly instead of male versus female, it'll be written out. They have a binder next to them, so you don't have to worry about them having to like get, confused of, oh crap, how do I look this up? Because the idea is it's bookmarked, and it's bookmarked in all the computers and the USC Herbarium as well, so they can easily track it. Although some of these things I do feel like Symbiota could make a drop-down menu, which
Yeah, totally.
it really would be better. But don't panic though, because there are excellent data cleaning and batch editing tools. So if your herbarium does choose to do this, there are ways to quickly batch edit. So to find all the terms that say male and all the terms that say M, and all the terms that if the alt key code goes through for some reason, to basically batch edit those. So there are excellent data cleaning tools for that.
May
next-
I stop? Like in the past slide, there was the question, should this be left blank if it's not explicit? This is one that I would say yes. And the reason is because there are, even though the plants might be functional carpellate or functionally staminate, both structures might be present and only one might be functional.
Right.
So if you don't have someone that really knows the taxon, and also it's not like a botanist, it might be a lot of, there might be a lot of false
Right.
answers to that field. So that's my vision on that.
Completely agree with that. So here, the individual count, this is very uncommon that I've seen for herbarium specimens. Actually, the most that I've seen this on are for rare species, because collectors like to note for rare species how many there are. So what we have been doing is we have been writing the verbatim into note/occurrence remarks, because it is an occurrence remark. And then we write the number into the individual count field. So for example, Patrick McMillan kindly pointed out that there were 16 plants. And he at this particular fern, and then he also pointed out that there were 23 plants at this other location. That's great. I love this. A number. What I keep on running into is that people will put about 2,000 individuals, more than 200 plants. I counted 68, but there were very likely more. It's supposed to be according to Darwin for a number. So yes, it's being recorded verbatim into the note/occurrence remarks, but do we want to put anything like this into the individual account? Like, we can just add the verbatim. We can add the lower bound, we can add the upper bound, we can use symbols to indicate, because it's a text field. And I hesitate because of what Herrick said, that the symbols I think will be stripped out. But then, yeah, do you add the lower bound? Do you like, so this is something that I genuinely don't have an answer for you guys or an opinion because I'm not.
I vote for verbatim.
Verbatim.
Prefer verbatim too, and then either, I guess, in habitat or description.
Okay, but do you want to
That would
add,
be my vote, verbatim.
okay, do you want to add it verbatim into individual count, which I'm fine with. I'm just pointing out that we will be deliberately going against these standards because it's supposed to be number only.
What was the other field where we couldn't put it in, was it notes? Or what was
Yeah.
it? Occurrence notes or something?
Yeah.
I'll put it occurrence remarks and that's it. Because even if a person tells you, I counted 68 plants, what if like it was just one long plant connected by like with a rhizome, right? So it can also be false, right?
Yeah.
I would think. So I prefer verbatim under occurrence remarks and leave individual count for the people that are doing like strict population studies.
Mhm. Okay. Is this mine or yours?
It's yours.
Oh, it's mine, sorry. Sampling protocol, sorry. Sampling protocol, so it's the protocol used to collect the plant. I have never seen it used. It's supposed to be detailing a protocol and the examples that they use, they include a link detailing the protocol. I can't even comment on what's supposed to go in this field because I've never seen it for plants. Have you guys seen this on any herbarium specimen?
No, but I have seen in labels detailed if there were additional samples like things collected in nitrogen or tissue collected for DNA. That's the only thing. Like, that kind of
Mhm.
of notes. But I think that we're primarily dealing with dry specimens, right? So I think that it's pretty standard.
I mean, I know like with Carolina Vegetation Survey, and I think we've had a few grad student projects where they used a very specific protocol to set up like arrays or something like that, where they would do their sampling, but I've never seen it recorded on the actual specimen labels. And it might be something that's more left to the dissertation or thesis in terms of where they put that kind of information. But I think this too is probably somewhat of a Darwin core field that they're trying to accommodate in case someone actually is recording that kind of information.
So for preparations, this is another field that we haven't seen used. We don't have any records with metadata for this. I've also been checking in Portal because I thought that might be a good one where they would talk about preparation like rehydration, but nothing in there. Darwin Core defines this as preparation or preservation used to the specimen. So at this time, we would only use this field if it was specified by the collector. So do you guys use the preparations field?
I don't.
So establishment means comes back to kind of what we were talking about with cultivated and captivated. And I was very confused about this because again, I feel like this is not specimen related. This is taxa related. Also, I found out that if you select something as cultivated and captivated, it's not actually included or distinguished in the download, which is why they were saying that you could write cultivated in establishment means, but then I'm like, but then you're duplicating your effort. But regardless, I mean, I guess I put this slide over here, but I just would also to point out, this is something that we need to discuss with Symbiota because the fact that it's cultivated, invasive, or native, that's taxa specific. I really feel like that doesn't, this establishment means does not have, it shouldn't be on the specimen record at all, in my opinion. Because it's just taking the cultivated, yeah, the taxa version of the cultivated field a step farther. Anyway. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I'm equally confused if that helps.
Thank you.
We use label project when the collector included their specimen in a specific.
Sorry, can I stop you and go back to the establishment means? I was muted and blathering and didn't realize it.
No.
Sorry. So yeah, I think what's going on here, it has something to do with the Symbiota format and how they're trying to translate data into a Darwin core format for export to like things like GBIF or whatever other database you might be trying to share in a DWC format. But establishment means, again, it could be at the population level where the collection's being made. It could be for the individual, but this screams like that classic sort of old home site kind of thing where it was probably cultivated at one point in time, but it's not currently actively being taken care of. There wasn't a little old lady out there tending to her flowers or something like that. It's something at an abandoned site, or it has escaped and naturalized, that sort of thing, from a nearby garden. But that by checking the cultivated box, you're basically saying that it's actively under cultivation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's speaking. It's not talking about the taxa. I know it's saying introduced or naturalized species or something like that, but it really should be focused on, in terms of like the data we're entering, on the specimen itself.
Yeah, and it doesn't really come up much because I don't think that people take the time to go to an old home site and say, start having a philosophical discussion in the field about whether or not it's been naturalized. So I've never actually
Yeah.
seen them say that.
What do you mean?
Well, I've never seen someone go out and say, oh yeah, well, it's only at this old home site because sure, it's native, but it's captive at this particular home site. Therefore, this county information is invalid.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Invalid. Like,
Yeah,
no,
well, I think so. Yeah, weekly and that the term they might use for some of these things is waif populations, which would be sort of persistent or somewhat escaped or something from some past human activity or something like that. So I don't know what am I digging myself a hole here? Are we am I setting us up for like coming up with standards for waif, naturalized, and produced?
right, and that's why I'm concerned.
It would be nice if we had some standard kind of concepts as far as that goes, I think.
Well, so basically, I apologize. So let me understand what you're saying. What you're saying, because we record that. So we literally have spent the past couple months at DNR. I mean, I have spent building up the infrastructure and making sure that everything is running smoothly, but Keith, Sam, and Eric have spent all this time going through all of the taxa in South Carolina and saying, is this a waif? Is this a wool waif? Is this native? Is this, you know, and just down the line for the status. I guess my question is, are you implying that there could be a species that is native, but at an old home site, it shouldn't count towards its distribution because it's native, but it's cultivated at or counts as a waif in that particular location simply because somebody planted it there? So if it's a plant that's normally found in Oconee County and typically only in the upstate, and then they took it and they planted it in their garden in Charleston, that Charleston record is somehow no longer native because it's from a home site?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think we're kind of conflating things. I mean, like it, in the case of a native species, it's like, the stuff at the State Botanical Garden, for instance, a lot of native things that are growing there well outside of their native range, they're cultivated. They may be established there, but they were put there by somebody somehow. That doesn't mean that the species as a whole is not native to, well, I mean, I guess maybe it does, to that specific area. But again, it's a matter of the individual record and how it was established at the point and ground associated with the locality information on this record.
Right.
Now,
But
it would be up to the individual researcher that's using these data to make an informed decision as to whether or not they wanted to include everything that was out there or only the naturally occurring populations, or but having a marker on here to tell them that something is there was some human intervention that got this thing growing where it is now.
But then
Is,
what's the difference between this and the cultivated checkbox?
Well, I think cultivated is yes, no, and I think that is a matter of the front end search criteria.
So this is just a duplicated field because so essentially this field is a duplicate of the cultivated / captive, which is specimen specific.
Yeah, which is really kind of goofy. But in terms of establishment means, it could, if you said naturalized, that doesn't necessarily mean that a human has intervened and planted something someplace. That means that the plant has sort of it was brought here either accidentally or intentionally. We don't know. Could have been in ship ballast or something from the colonial era, but that would not necessarily qualify it as cultivated captive. You follow what I'm saying? So you couldn't set up this database to say, oh, if I've got anything populating this field, like the type status field now, if there's anything in there, when you check the box on the front end search criteria, it's just going to say, show me results where type status is not null. We can't do that with establishment means and assume that if something has an establishment means value of whatever, that it automatically means it's cultivated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not hearing oh, I get it.
Well, I guess no, I hear that, but I feel like that's so much speculation from a collector who's just running through and just grabbing a plant. I guess I'm just trying to picture when this field would be used, but I understand the concept. I just don't see how anybody would be able to hang out at one particular spot long enough to make these kind of judgment calls.
I couldn't do it. So for me, that I came to South Carolina 2 years ago, everything that was here, with some exceptions, are native to me. But this is me, right? So this field might be important for like your project, Sheila. So like probably someone with a lot more understanding of the flora of here can trace these things better, and you can use it. You can use this field to like make to label things, right? To like, some fields, at least I use some fields to just label or to like mark some specimens. So I feel that this might not be like a very useful field unless you're an expert and you have a particular project. I don't know if this helps this vision. I do totally get like someone like Eric that has been here for a long time and understands the flora better and like how it's like has a better idea of the landscape. I can see how this works, how this helps for initiatives like yours.
And I'll say too, thank you for sharing that perspective, because I'm beginning to understand where I'm conflating things too. Is that I'm not advocating that we populate this field on everything. I'm only saying that in the case that you have a specimen where the collector has said something like apparently persistent, in those cases, I would interpret that as meaning this is not necessarily a native plant. It appeared from the landscape that it was a foundation planting against an old abandoned home site or something like that. That would inform me, or give me enough information to say that this is probably not a species that normally occurs here and would have been planted at some point in time by a human. That's what I'm saying. So only if the label is informing me in that way would I bother adding that sort of stuff.
Okay, see, that makes more sense. I apologize. That, oh, right. So we would need, if someone is going to make that comment, then we would need to have a table of translations for that, for if we're gonna have that field filled out, especially for myself as well. Because that is a very specific example that now that you say it, it makes sense to me. Like, great. So if a collector specifically wrote apparently persistent, so that might be a field that needs a little bit more research on our part of like when we run into these things, right? These key phrases are showing up because I just was racking my brain of when I've ever seen someone like make that comment, but specifically establishment means, but that apparently persistent. I've seen that. That makes good sense. Okay, but so we're running out of time a little bit. I apologize.
Label project, when the collector included their specimen in a specific project, the labels that we see are the vast majority have a label project, usually on the top portion. We enter this verbatim with 2 caveats. If it exceeds the field's 255 character limit, we stick this into data generalizations instead. Some label projects will also include the state or county after the full label name. The example, oh, it's on the next slide, but this will commonly happen to encompass multiple areas, but we still only include what the main label project name in the field, because this helps to avoid redundancy for one, since the locality is already in the preceding fields before this. And it helps to avoid, again, exceeding the character limit of the field. Here you can see specifically, actually, I don't think they can because the thing's there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's
this whole time.
There's a comma right after plants of Mecklenburg County, but we still only write this in as plants of Mecklenburg County. Do
I
you
have a
guys
question.
agree
Oh.
with excluding these additional portions?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the question was, so when you talked about the Exicata title,
Mhm.
I noticed that you had the flora of Chattooga in the Exicata. How does that differ from the flora of Macon County? Or like, you had flora of Macon County, right? So what makes it different, the Exicata from the label project?
Publication.
Publication, yeah, so Exicata, somebody's actually gone through,
Okay,
yeah, so someone's published it, and so typically we find them on what, Biodiversity Heritage
The
Library?
specimens are cited specifically and individually numbered for that Exicata, which
okay.
is different from the collector number.
Yeah,
Okay, so in this case, Plants of Macon County, it's not under a publication, so you're putting that into the Plants of Macon, the label project field, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. And I am okay for like the other parts not being included.
Okay. In language, we just have the abbreviation that the collection label is written in. Our format has been 2 letters, lowercase, and just a couple of examples here: English, EN, German, DE, French, FR, and so on. Do you guys use the language field, and do you feel that it should be abbreviated into 2 characters as we have done, or should it be fully written out?
I don't use it, everything is in English. I don't know if I should be adding that it's in English.
Same for me.
Yeah, I mean, you can batch at it if you want, but I'm happy with what y'all suggested
Okay.
in terms of.
All right, we had recorded your opinion.
One point to make on that. Are you suggesting that students would need to do this? That we would need students to know which language they're dealing with?
If it's non-English, we pass it somewhere else unless they're proficient.
Yeah.
So they will not even do anything with that, really.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna send this out to the entire SC consortium because it was just 2 of each day, which is wonderful. I love that. And then I'm gonna, if people respond or take the time to respond, I'll take and collect their responses and send it out to everybody to see what other people had to say about this. So I'm gonna give people some time on that. Of essentially, yeah, like what precisely they think. And I know it's final, so maybe I'll give people 2 or 3 weeks before I shut the poll down, and then I'll send out the results. Because I do know that people want to be here and could not be here. So keep an eye out for that to hear what other people said. And if you are coming to the in-person SC Consortium, let us know. There is free lunch, so come join us and come get a tour of USCH and SCDNR. And we can chat about Herbaria in South Carolina.
I will try. I want to meet you all personally. Finally, hopefully.
Yeah, chill. I'm planning on being there. I'll probably bring my student assistant as well.
Perfect. I love that. All right, and it's getting to 3:30, so I'm gonna go ahead and let you guys go. Thank you both for coming.
Thanks.
And well,
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you.
Yep. Same here.
Hi, Eric.
And great job, you guys.
Yes, yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for
Bye.
putting it together. Bye.
Yep.